The walls seemed to close in on me as I moved through the enormous, peaceful house, my footsteps resonating in the stillness that had once felt cozy and full of love. My husband Karanja was constantly away on business, and every trip and late-night meeting eroded the intimacy and closeness we once shared. When I married Karanja, he was my best friend and would have lofty dreams and late-night conversations, but now he was more a stranger than a partner, coming into my life for a short time and then vanishing again into the world of business dealings and incessant phone calls. On my most lonely days, I found comfort in the one thing that always made me happy. Tenno, our stunning white horse. Every day I would go out to the bar in search of Tenno's peaceful company. He was a magnificent creature with eyes that were warm and soulful and a coat that shone in the sun. Tenno appeared to be sensitive to my feelings, reacting with tactful prods and a tolerance that made me feel a sense of belonging everywhere else I was lacking. I would gently caress his Mina while confiding in him about secrets I couldn't share with anyone else. I would also vent my frustrations and sadness since you always listened to me. Whenever Karanja returned home, he would find me at the bar with Tenno smiling softly. Over time, our link got deeper as I spoke my voice with a trace of both thankfulness and regret. You and that horse are inseparable, or you spend more time with him than with me, Karanja would remark casually as I combed his coat or rested against him, feeling a calm in his company. Knowing that Tenno was now more than just a pet to me, he was my confidant and my comfort, I would grin and ignore it. I discovered an enduring friendship that had grown to mean the world to me, but as Cannon's absences increased in length and frequency, his demeanor changed from light-hearted amusement to occasional annoyance. Although he never expressed it out loud, it seemed as though he resented the bond that Shar had with a horse, a bond that had grown in the space he left behind. And I could see it but felt helpless. In spite of Cannon's coldness, my desire for more time with Tenno had long since been ignored. Our bond became the highlight of my days, a haven from the loneliness that plagued me. It served as a second home, a place where I could escape the reality of my distant marriage and the emptiness of the house. During those quiet hours with Tenno, I felt seen, understood, and cared for in a way that Kanga no longer offered. Little did I know that this bond would soon be the very thing that brought hidden truths to the surface, setting in motion events that would forever alter my life. The few times that Karen spent at home felt colder as his travels increased in frequency. May's interruptions between meetings caused me to become a spectator in my own marriage as I watched him rush in distractedly, barely packing for his next trip or answering emails. Even when we sat across from each other, it felt like he was already absorbed in the next deal, the next client, the next important thing that wasn't me. Every time he left, I would try to gently bring up my loneliness and ask for a little more time together in the hopes of rekindling the warmth that had once filled our lives. But Karen's responses were always the same vacuous assurances and promises that his busy season would end soon, or a quick dismissive remark about how I should find a hobby to keep myself entertained. I would nod, trying to believe him, but the excuses began to feel like cracks in the foundation of our relationship. Every time he left during his rare moments at home, Karanja noticed that I was spending more time with Tenno. He would often see me in the barn before we could sit down and talk. At first, he made fun of it, smirking as I brushed the horse's coat with a tenderness I no longer show him. Now, though, his tone was amused with a hint of irritation or jealousy, and I could only smile weakly as I brushed off his remarks. Karanja's amusement turned to quiet resentment as the months passed. He noticed that I was spending more and more time at Tano's side with my horse, and my joy was becoming more tied to him than to him. During one of his brief stays at home, he watched as I spent hours in the bar brushing Tano's coat, my voice carrying through the still air as I spoke to the horse as though it were a human. Karanja said nothing, but his gaze hardened, and his irritation simmered just beneath the surface. He started to throw tantrums. That little snarky jabs. His tone became increasingly colder whenever we spoke. "I don't know why you're always with that horse," he would say, shaking his head. It was as if I should be more concerned about being with him than my own husband. I felt like there was no use in continuing to explain myself to someone who didn't get it. I knew he saw my connection with Tenno as a sign of weakness or frivolity, something insignificant and silly. Tenno, on the other hand, was the only constant in my life. She remained when my world sank further and further away from what it had once been. My heart began to recede a bit farther as Karen's comments just grew more profound. I felt alone in my pain because of the rift between us. Little did he realize that his indifference was actually drawing me closer to the bond he despised, which was strengthening my bond with Tenno. Through this bond, I discovered a strength that Karanja couldn't understand or take away. One night, after Cannon's rush returned, I felt a strange sense of unease. He had come back later than expected, slipping into the house with barely a word, heading straight to the shower without even a glance in my direction. I watched him disappear upstairs, feeling a heaviness settle in my chest, a whisper of suspicion I couldn't shake. While waiting for him to finish, I sat on our bed, trying to ignore the nagging worry. My eyes fell on his phone abandoned on the nightstand, its screen lighting up with a new notification. Normally I wouldn't look. I had always trusted him, even through his distant behavior, but something about that night felt different, as though a curtain was about to lift and reveal the truth. Heart pounding, I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I glanced at the notification. The text message wasn't from a work contact or an old friend. The name was unfamiliar, and the words on the screen were even more so. My breath hitched as I read the lines, a flirtatious message filled with casual intimacy and familiarity that felt like a punch to my gut. I quickly scrolled up, my eyes scanning the conversation, each message unraveling the reality. I tried so hard to deny there were confessions of moments, plans for secret meetings, and warm sentiments he hadn't shared with me in years. My heart raced with each word, each sentence, another crack in the illusion I'd been holding on to. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and most of all deeply lonely in a way I had never fully acknowledged. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of it all settled on my shoulders. My husband had been unfaithful, and all the while he'd been dismissing my needs, belittling my feelings, leaving me to find comfort in an empty home, unable to bear the sight of his things around me. I hurried out of the house, needing escape. I moved quickly to the bond, my sanctuary, seeking comfort in the one place that had become my haven. Tenno greeted me with a soft whinny, his warm eyes watching me as though he understood my pain. I collapsed beside him, wrapping my arms around his strong neck, my body racked with sobs as I let all my anger, my sadness, and my loneliness pour out. The bond was quiet save for the gentle sounds of Tano breathing, his steady presence calming me in a way nothing else could. I spent the night there, leaning against him, my tears soaking into his coat as I cried myself to exhaustion. Tenno stood close, unmoving, his warmth a silent reassurance. In that moment, I felt more understood by him than I ever had by Karanja. As dawn broke, I felt the first stirrings of anger settle into something else, a resolve. Karen's betrayal had cut deep, but the accusations, the sarcastic remark about my time with Tenno stung even more. All this time he had dismissed me, belittling my connection with the one creature who had shown me unwavering companionship while he was the one truly betraying our marriage. I realized that I could no longer be silent, no longer let myself be minimized by his neglect. The morning sun cast a harsh light through the windows as I walked back into the house, my mind swirling with anger and pain. I had spent a sleepless night in the bar, finding brief soothe in Tano's steady presence, but now my grief had hardened into a quiet resolve. The betrayal I had uncovered led over the years of neglect had ignited something in me, a refusal to remain silent, to be treated as invisible any longer. I was ready to confront Karanja, no matter how difficult it might be. When I entered the kitchen, I found Karanja standing by the coffee machine, scrolling through his phone with that familiar detached look on his face. Seeing him there so casual, so seemingly unaware of the pain he had caused, made my heart ache all over again. Without waiting for him to speak, I walked up to him and laid his phone on the counter, my eyes fixed on his. He glanced at me, surprised, before his gaze shifted to the phone, a flicker of guilt crossing his face as he realized what I had seen. Karanja tensed, his posture defensive as he avoided my stare. "You went through my phone," he muttered, his tone accusatory, as if he were the one who had been wronged. "I had to find out somehow," I replied, my voice calm but unyielding. I could feel the weight of my own hurt and anger, years of loneliness and neglect boiling beneath the surface. "After everything, you still chose to lie to me, and you tried to make me feel like I was the one at fault, that I was obsessed with Tenno, all while you..." My voice caught, but I forced myself to continue. "All while you were betraying me." Cannon's face darkened, his initial shock giving way to frustration. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed, folding his arms defensively. "You acting like I'm the only one at fault here. Do you think I haven't noticed how much time you spend with that horse? You're always out there brushing him, talking to him. Honestly, sometimes it seems like you care more about that animal than about your own husband." The accusation struck me like a slap. His words were both hurtful and absurd. I could barely believe what I was hearing. The idea that he would accuse me of cheating with Tenno, a horse, was a reflection of just how distorted his perspective had become. Anger set through my veins, and for the first time in years I didn't hold back. "Don't you dare deflect this onto me," I replied, my voice low and firm. "Yes, I turned too, because I was lonely, because you want there, but he was there, Karanja, he was there when you won. And don't twist this around like it's my fault that you couldn't stay faithful, that you couldn't even respect the vows we made. Karen's face twisted with anger, his defensiveness only hardened, but I refused to back down. I could see that he didn't want to take responsibility, didn't want to acknowledge how deeply he had hurt me. To him, the idea of losing his reputation, his carefully crafted image, seemed more concerning than the loss of our marriage, but I was done trying to reach him. I realized now that the man I once loved was no longer there, replaced by someone who valued power and success over trust, intimacy, and integrity. I wouldn't stay silent anymore, and I wouldn't let him continue to pretend that everything was fine while he carried on with his deceit. Without another word, I turned away, leaving him to simmer in his frustration and guilt. My mind was made up. I would no longer allow myself to be treated like an afterthought, and I would no longer protect a man who had betrayed me so deeply. As I looked out toward the bond where I waited, I felt a quiet sense of determination growing within me. I knew what I needed to do next, and I would face it with the same strength and resolve that had carried me through my darkest moments. The next morning I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant outfit that conveyed quiet confidence. I had spent a long night contemplating my next steps, and while the anger still simmered, I now felt a sense of purpose. I was done letting Karanja hide behind his polished reputation, done protecting the image of a man who had shattered my trust. Today I would bring the truth to light. I drove to Cannon's office building, my heart pounding but my resolve steady. I knew the core values of his company, family, trust, and integrity, were words plastered across every wall, and in every corporate brochure. It was ironic. I thought that he built his career on ideals he had abandoned so easily in his personal life. I had supported him as he climbed the ladder, believing in those values as much as he had, but now I was ready to strip away the facade and show everyone the truth. As I walked into the office, I noticed the familiar faces of Karen's business partners and colleagues, people who had once admired our marriage, often holding us up as an example of stability and partnership. When they saw me, there was a moment of surprise. They hadn't expected me to be there, especially unaccompanied by my husband, but I greeted them calmly, asking to speak with the key partners in private, my voice steady and unshakable. Once they were gathered in a private conference room, Kang's partners looked at me with growing concern. Sensing the seriousness in my expression, I took a deep breath, feeling both empowered and vulnerable. As I began to speak, I shed the truth about my husband's infidelity, showing them the messages on his phone that laid bare his betrayal. I didn't embellish or dramatize. I simply let the evidence speak for itself. One by one, their expressions shifted from shock to disappointment. They had trusted Ron, or invested in him, not only financially, but personally, believing him to be a man of character who upheld the very values they had built that business around. As I finished, the room fell into a heavy silence, each of them processing the impact of what they had learned. After a moment, the senior partner stood, his voice grave. "We built this business on trust and integrity," he said, his eyes clouded with disappointment. "If Karanja can't uphold these values in his own life, how can we expect him to lead this company? We have no choice but to pull our support." I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction as I watched that decision unfold. I hadn't come to ruin him out of spite. I simply wanted him to face the truth, to feel the weight of his actions. I knew how much his work meant to him, and perhaps, just maybe, this would make him understand the pain he had caused, the trust he had shattered, not only in our marriage but also in his business. As I left the office, word of the scandal began to spread, and I could feel the murmurs and glances as I walked through the building. I knew the consequences would be swift, that Cannon's reputation would likely crumble, taking the company down with it, but I felt a sense of release, knowing I had finally reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my sense of worth. Driving back home, I felt an odd sense of peace, a lightness that I had felt in years. I knew I had exposed the truth, not out of vengeance, but as a way of freeing myself from the lies and betrayal that had plagued my marriage. And in doing so, I had made a statement that my loyalty and devotion were no longer something to be taken for granted or dismissed. As I pulled into the driveway and saw Tenno grazing peacefully near the barn, I felt a wave of gratitude. I hadn't only reclaimed my dignity, but also anew found strength, ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. In the days that followed, the fallout from the scandal was swift and unforgiving. Kang's business lost clients and investors, his reputation lay in shambles, but I at last felt a sense of closure. I filed for divorce, leaving behind the home that had become a place